A dream is a wish your heart makes when you're fast asleep. In dreams you will lose your heartache. Whatever you wish for, you keep.
Hello everyone, it's the Afro Avenger here with another album review, and today's album is going to be A Head Full of Dreams by Coldplay. This was released December 4th of 2015. Some chart information about it. It peaked number 2 on the OCC UK albums, number 1 on the OCC UK digital albums, number 2 on the US Billboard 200, number 1 on both the US Billboard Top Alternative Albums and US Billboard Top Rock Albums. So it was released on the label Parlophone and Atlantic, and its singles were Adventure of a Lifetime and Hymn for the Weekend. So without further ado, let's get this started. This happens to be Coldplay's 7th studio album, and quite a different one at that. Much of the feel of this album is pointed in a pop, dance, electronic direction as opposed to the previous albums that were almost exclusively alternative and progressive rock. However, is this shift a positive one for the band? Well, let's find out. A Head Full of Dreams is more or less a more positive sequel to the previous album, Ghost Stories, which, if you've seen my review, you'd know it was absolutely sad and depressing. This album is the total opposite. While Ghost Stories had deep, dark instrumentals and saddening lyricism, this album is basically taking the idea of Chris Martin's bad divorce from his ex-wife Gwyneth Paltrow, who actually helped write one of the songs on this album, and lifting himself up out of that place where he once was. This album is like Chris reflecting on the positives of the relationship and deciding that it's time to move forward with his life. As I already stated, this album is radically different instrumentally from anything they've done in their past. Even though Ghost Stories was very electronic based, and before that Milo Xyloto was beginning to experiment with more electronic instruments, this particular album has much more influences of dance and electronic rock than any album before it. It shows Coldplay's creative progression as they're beginning to concoct much more elaborate productions than before. The main idea about this album is life changes and accepting them. The idea that life is like a river, ever shifting, but always moving forward. Ghost Stories focused on longing, while this album says that things change, and while it may not be easy to accept them, we have to accept them in order to progress through our lives. Throughout the album, there are many references to ancient Persian poetry, such as the Conference of the Birds by Attar of Nishapur in the first track, the title track A Head Full of Dreams. It's referenced again in the following track, Birds. Later on in the album, on the track Kaleidoscope, it actually has an excerpt from the poem The Guest House by Persian poet and philosopher Rumi, and even has a sample of Amazing Grace sung at the memorial for South Carolina State Senator Clementa Pinckney, in which President Barack Obama himself led the song. Ambience also plays a rather big role on this album, as several tracks open up with ambient noise before going into the main song, such as the opening title track, the track Hymn for the Weekend, and the instrumental track Color Spectrum. I suppose it's meant to build somewhat of an atmosphere to prepare the listener for the track and put them in the right kind of mood for what the song contains. While many of the tracks have electro-pop and hip-hop influences, one track in particular sticks out above all the others, and that's Adventure of a Lifetime. This track is actually more of a disco-influenced track and reminded me a great deal of Daft Punk's song Get Lucky, in which they collaborated with Pharrell Williams, who at that point was no stranger to the dance genre, and legendary leader of the funk disco band Chic, Nile Rodgers. Around the line, I feel my heart underneath my skin and I feel my heart beating, they take the beat into what is popularly known as underwater, something artists like Drake are quite fond of, in which the beat is altered to make it sound as if it was being played through a speaker underwater. It's quite impressive and admittedly odd direction for a band like Coldplay to take, considering all the albums beforehand where they were almost exclusively sticking to your basic instruments like guitar, drums, piano, and bass. That's kind of how it is for the majority of the album. While many tracks contain elements of pop and dance, several tracks retain a sort of rock jacket, such as Army of One or Amazing Day. In fact, Army of One, a song about Chris always being there for the one he loves most, and declaring how beautiful they are, actually uses live drums as opposed to a usual drum machine. There happens to be several guest appearances on this album, the first of which being Beyoncé on the track Hymn for the Weekend. Of course, Chris and Beyonce aren't strangers to each other, but this is the first time they've actually collaborated. But on this track, Beyonce is more so there for support. A really unique feature on this track is the hand claps, as well as the addition of the tapping glasses for percussion. There are many references to drinking within the song, such as the line "drink from me" and, got me feeling drunk and high. However, this isn't talking about actually drinking alcohol, it's talking about a metaphorical drink from someone so amazing that they're considered angelic. Chris has stated that Beyonce made this album 90% better, but I kind of beg to differ, as Beyonce's role on this album was nothing big or prominent, even within the confines of this very song. It has a great hip-hop beat, very much in the same vein as Beyonce's own work, but unfortunately Beyonce just didn't play as big of a role on this track as she perhaps could have. It's not like when Coldplay collaborated with Rihanna on Princess of China, but it's still a tight track. Another feature is on the track Fun, which has Tuvlo, but again, the featured artist is really only there for backbone support in the song. This track is bittersweetly reflecting on the good times in Chris's past relationship over deep production with additional acoustic guitar. Color Spectrum, which is represented by a literal color spectrum on the track listing, is the only instrumental track on the entire album. However, it feels less like an actual track and more like the kind of segue tracks that are found on Milo Xyloto, like MMIX and A Hopeful Transmission. Milo Xyloto had a better reason to do so, as it was a pop-rock opera, so things like short segues and transitions were almost necessary. However, in the case of this album, it doesn't really seem like it belongs. The only reason it could be there is just to build up to the final track, as it does come right before then. However, the final track, Up and Up, is a down-tempo pop track, therefore it seems almost pointless that Color Spectrum would ever need to build up to it. Overall, this was a solid record, but nothing super impressive like I was expecting. When I heard Coldplay was releasing a new album, I was anticipating something even better than Ghost Stories and even surpassing Milo Xyloto. And when I saw the album's cover with how colorful and trippy it was, I was suspecting that it was going to have influences of psychedelic rock or something. Nothing about it could be really considered psychedelic at all. It's your typical pop rock record, to be honest. The idea of this album having themes of being lifted up out of a dark place, enjoying life and moving forward, was highly ambitious, and I honestly think that that's what brought this album down a peg. It was over ambitious, from the album's cover art to the samples to the references to ancient Persian poetry to the instrumentation to the production to the general idea of the album and what it was trying to convey. I love the fact that Coldplay wanted to go out once again and try something different with their sound. They did it on, of course, Milo Xyloto, and they did it on Ghost Stories, but this album, I think, was especially trying to simultaneously link itself to Ghost Stories and come out on top over it all at the very same time. It wanted to be better because the message was better, more positive, as opposed to Chris just being in his feeling sorry for himself for an entire album like on Ghost Stories. That's all to say that this album was more on the disappointing side. That's not to say that it was disappointing instrumentally, because a lot of the songs had very unique and fun instrumentals. It was just overall a disappointing project. I don't think it lived up to what it was trying to do with itself, and fell flat because of it. Ambition is great, but over-ambition can either make or break an album. However, this album is certainly worth a listen, and I recommend for anyone into pop rock, electronic rock, dance pop, and slightly disco. My favorite tracks were probably Hymn for the Weekend, Everglow, Adventure of a Lifetime, of course, Army of One, which contains the hidden track X Marks the Spot, and Amazing Day. Thank you for watching this review. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you did enjoy, please hit that like button and also subscribe if you want to see more. And if there's a song or an album that you want to see reviewed, just leave a comment down below, or check out my Facebook or my Twitter. The links are in the description. And that does it for this review. I will see you all in the next video. So long.